The Chancellor says it's a plan to escape recession. Higher taxes, lower standards of living, cuts to public services. Tonight, the people have their say in our cost of living debate. Good evening and welcome to Darlington as the brutal economic reality of yesterday's budget sinks in. We are in the grand ballroom of the Dolphin Centre, though there aren't, in truth, many people who feel like dancing tonight. So in this room, we have a wide range of people to talk about how the cost of living is affecting them. We asked the government and the Conservative Party if a minister or MP would join us, but nobody was available. We do have local Tory activists with us who helped turn Darlington from red to blue at the last election. From Labour, we're joined by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Steve Reed, and we also have some experts in the audience to help with the facts. Let's get more detailed reaction to yesterday's budget and hear some of the challenges people are facing from our audience here in Darlington. So you've been warned that living standards are going to fall by about 7% over the next 2 years. What does that mean to you? Anna Maria Toms, let me come to you first. Now, you're a carer. You are dependent on benefits. Now, people are going to say, well, benefits are going up by 10.1%. That should be OK, then. How are you feeling about the next year or two?
I struggle at the moment, so I get my clothes in charity shops, I buy sale things, I don't use a food bank, but I've put a lot of the food we've been buying on the credit card because my son's autistic and he's got food aversion, so a lot of the food you get from food banks will be processed things that he just won't eat. So I've got debt already. I'm struggling to pay a mortgage because I'm recently divorced. And a lot of the things I do around the home, so I've got no tumble dryer, I don't use a hairdryer. We're taking showers instead of baths, and I'm trying to get the children to take less time in the shower, which is difficult. I'm already doing a lot of things, like I'm thinking about getting rid of the freezer because that uses a lot of electricity. So I've been preserving the things that I grow at my allotment in tins and jars rather than use the freezer. So at the moment, some of my son's DLA is paying the bills, which is not really what it's there for. It's supposed to be enhancing his life. So I'm worried there's no cap, or there's a possibility of the energy bills going so high that I can't afford them, and I just find that really difficult at the moment.
OK. I mean, you know, we're hearing those kinds of stories all over the country, but I mean, what we've been hearing today is talk of the squeezed middle again. People who are in work, who've got incomes. Simon Hocking, where are you? Simon, now, you're an engineer, you're working.
Yeah. My big problem with this, I'm ashamed there's no Conservative minister here, because the question I like to ask...
You are a Labour activist, aren't you?
I am a Labour activist, yeah, I am a paid-up party member. But the important bit to it is, we're given this advice, we see them come out on TV and they say, if you're not happy with your standard of living, go get a new job and get a better paid job. Well, I've gone and done that. I've gone and got the better job. I wasn't earning enough where I last worked. I've now worked somewhere else. I got a decent pay rise. My wife's gone and done the same. The other bit of advice is buy your home, don't rent. So we bought a house and we saved and we got together and we put the money together. We've kept up our end of the bargain, and the government has let us down by not meeting us halfway, because we're doing what we can. We can't control our mortgage rates when they go up next year, because our fixed rate finishes in 2 years, next August even. And my wage is not going to go up straight away, because I've only just started this new job. So what else are we meant to do? Because we're already doing everything that we've been told we should do, and we're going to go backwards next year rather than forwards.
Well, Rishi is sitting next to you, not the Rishi. But, well, I suppose you are the Rishi at Darlington, yeah, aren't you? What's your situation?
So me and my wife both work, but I want to talk about the larger impact of cost of living on people. It's like about 16% increase in cost of living as per ONS survey, ONS data, which means a lot to all families, not like people who are working, who are in care, who are in various circumstances. So I believe that is a big pinch to everyone in the community.
Are you going to be able to afford your current standard of living?
Yes, I can, yeah. I can, but I feel for others, definitely.
Right. Who else wants to come in here? Who else has got an experience they want to tell me about? Yes. Lady there in the third row, yeah.
I'm a solicitor in Darlington. I've been a solicitor for 22 years, but I set up my own business 2 years ago, and my income from that business comes directly from clients. There's no diversification in legal work. It's all from clients, and so the impact on my business is directly affected by people being able to either afford a lawyer or deciding to go it alone and represent themselves.
So if they don't have money, you don't have money?
Correct.
Right.
And that is then impacting on the outcome of people's legal cases. They're representing themselves. They may not have a good outcome, which can then have far-reaching consequences. So I came through the pandemic with my business, and that again affected how people were spending money. People couldn't separate.
We're going to talk more about business later on in the programme, but thank you for that. Michelle Cooper, now you are from the County Durham Community Foundation. Yep. Charities come to you for money.
That's correct. Yes.
What's happening to the demand at the moment here? You know, when you listen to these sorts of stories.
Yeah, so we're seeing demand that is really... We're back in COVID times, to be perfectly honest with you. The difficulty that we're having is the applications are coming to us. My team evaluated 100 applications just last week, awarded £340,000. But this time round, the money's not flowing from government. We're not getting any support. It's only what we can raise from individuals, from businesses, that will help the charities that are seeing demand just go through the roof right now. Various people have said that you can't budget what you haven't got. You can't cut anything else. And people are really struggling to make ends meet, and the demand for food banks is growing. But I think what's wonderful is the charity sector is just stepping up and providing safe spaces. Spaces where people can go, people can talk, but also develop their own skills. They want to get back into work, and charities are trying to provide that.
Right. Well, Labour Steve Reed is right next to you. We've heard a smattering of how people feel about the next couple of years. Yep. Your party has signed up to Conservative fiscal rules. So you're not going to have any more money to spend, are you?
Well, to be clear, we've got our own fiscal rules. The Conservatives have been all over the place the last few weeks. And what we've been hearing is the real pain and anguish that households are feeling, not just in Darlington, but up and down the country. I see it in my constituency too. And what happened, it was a couple of months ago, we had the kamikaze budget that caused a run on the pound because the Conservatives came up with £60 billion worth of unfunded commitments.
Let's not re-prosecute that. I'm trying to get you to focus on your alternatives, which don't seem to be very impressive at the moment.
What happened yesterday was in part because of what happened a few weeks ago, but the problem goes back 12 years. We've had a low-growth economy for all of those 12 years, and that the core of Labour's offer going forwards is that we have a plan to grow the economy, and the Tories don't. And if they had that plan to grow the economy, then we would have seen it by now in these 12 years. Jeremy Hunt, 9 years in Cabinet. Rishi Sunak, 3 years Chancellor of the Exchequer. If they knew how to grow the economy, they would have grown it. And the reason that we're facing all of these problems with taxes escalating in a way that is strangling household budgets, wages are on the floor compared to many of our competitors, is because our economy has got the lowest growth of the OECD, 38 major economies in the planet, and we are the only country in the G7 that is still smaller than at the beginning of the pandemic. That is the fault of the Conservative government, because all of those countries have had these global headwinds that we're all facing.
Let me bring in Professor Jagjit Chadha from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. You saw that poll finding, which said that people blame the government rather than external factors. Is that fair?
Not entirely. Clearly, over the longer run, government choices are the things that matter for prosperity and growth. But the news that we heard yesterday from the OBR is that as a result of the increase in energy prices and continuing problem with supply chains and shortages of food, don't forget we have learned over the last 6 months that Ukraine has also been the breadbasket of the world. That the UK activity...
So when Jeremy Hunt says this is a recession made in Russia, that's true, is it, straightforwardly?
Well, what we've learned is that the UK economy is going to be some 4 to 5% smaller than we thought 6 months ago. And at the same time, the government, in the position of wanting to ensure that public debt is falling over a planning horizon, has in fact increased expenditure over the next 2 years by the same amount. So we have a 4% increase in government expenditure to try and offset some of the things that we're talking about.
I'll come to you in a minute. I just want to get a quick show of hands from the audience in the room. If you are already going without, if you're already cutting back, whether it's on your heating or your food bills or whatever it might be, can you raise your hand? All right, it's about half of you, maybe a little bit more than half of you. Yeah, at the back there, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to point out that the Shadow Minister had said that he mentioned Liz Truss's underfunded tax cuts, and obviously that was a massive mistake. But does he not accept that Labour's £147 billion commitments that they haven't budgeted for? But is that not the same kind of level of bad fiscal policy?
Well, the figure actually isn't right. But there's a difference between borrowing to invest and borrowing to binge. And what the Conservatives did was borrow to throw the money away. What Labour would do would be to borrow to invest in transforming the economy so that we have a green economy, investing in solar, wave, nuclear power, so that we can take control of our own energy, cut bills and create jobs. That then brings money back into the exchequer. So in borrow to invest, sensible; borrow to binge, Tory plan, ruinous.
OK, there's a hand up here as well. What would you like to say?
Yes,
who are you first?
So I'm Joshua Vale. I actually run a lettings company, a residential lettings company. And it's interesting we're talking about borrowing, because both major parties seem to want to borrow, which obviously drives up interest rates generally, means that we have to increase our mortgage payments and therefore pass that on in increased rents to tenants. In fact, in one situation I've got, our mortgage payments are set to double on a particular house in the new year. Doesn't seem like any major party actually has a plan to drive down mortgage rates, interest rates, because the plan seems to be to borrow, 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 which will have a massive impact on renters across the country.
Judge, you're trying to get back in.
Yes, the way to think about yesterday is absolutely a response to the disaster of the mini-budget. But with a more appropriate set of fiscal plans, actually long-term interest rates have come down quite substantially from where they were a month or so ago. That ought to give, ultimately, space for the Bank of England not to raise interest rates to the levels that we were worried about a few weeks ago. In fact, there are many at the bank, the MPC, who wouldn't want rates to rise too much, because much of the inflation, because it's being caused by this one-off increase in energy prices, will start to go out of the frame of reference over the course of the next year, and inflation will start to come down of its own accord without interest rates having to rise to the levels that would lead to mortgages doubling. We think it's more likely in the range of a 40 to 50% increase in mortgages, which absolutely is difficult for many households. But those interest rates rising to something like 3 to 4% is more in keeping with the long-term historical norm.
Okay.
That should lead to capital being better allocated to more productive firms.
All right.
So in a way, it's consistent with growth, not against it.
Maybe that'll be a little bit of reassurance, but let's see. I mean, the Chancellor may have offered additional money to schools and the NHS, but it is public sector workers facing the biggest hit to living standards, with public sector pay growth now at historic lows in comparison to the private sector. Let's hear from, well, the rather obvious medic in our audience, right on the front row. Ben Ritchie, you're a GP here. Yeah. I mean, how desperate are things?
There's no surprise. My opinion is going to be that sometimes it feels like GPs are at the point of collapse. We are getting emails monthly saying, please, don't send people to A&E. We're full. Then the hospitals are full, and 1 in 5, I think it is, patients are actually ready to be discharged. They're okay. They can go, but there's nowhere for them to go. There's no care home for them to go to. And what really worries me is the lack of any plan. I'm not seeing, I'm not hearing noise. I get little increments of a bit of money here and a big number.
There's billions more going into the NHS.
Huge numbers, numbers, but there's no plan. I don't see this grand unveiling of a cure for the fact that these beds are blocked.
And what about your colleagues who are facing real terms pay cuts? I mean, are you losing staff?
We're struggling to recruit. The number of GPs per patient is decreasing, so one GP has got a lot more patients than they used to have. And as a result of that workforce issue, we're using alternative options, nursing staff, and a divergence of different people to take on that role. But you can't find people to come in, and we're really struggling with recruitment.
We've got a Conservative councillor in the room, haven't we? Where are you? Right next to you. Right, OK. What do you say to your neighbour, the doctor?
It's a difficult one. I'm Mike Renton. I'm on the cabinet in Darlington Borough Council. And I deal a lot with frontline services. So my portfolio is strong communities, so I work a lot with the police and with the fire. And a lot of the conversations we've been having recently is that there needs to be reform in the way that we fund these services, because, for example, the fire, who currently are voting on, or they have voted for industrial action to get more than a 5% pay rise. And that means, I think it was a 5% no condition pay rise, and the unions were pushing them hard to say, no, we want more, and yet the chief fire officer is telling me if they get more, they're going to be cut.
So how do you explain to your public sector workers that they've got to take home a big pay cut over the next year, in real terms?
I mean, the money's just not there at the moment. If everyone wants to have a big pay rise, they're going to have to be increased taxes. They're going to have to be council tax, for example.
But private sector salaries are going up by about 6%, aren't they? Much higher than the public sector.
Yeah, and we don't.
And that's why people are leaving the public sector, isn't it?
It can often be more look better to work in the private sector, but we don't have the mechanisms to change what happens in the private sector.
You're nodding away behind. I mean, would you like to come in?
Well, I was just going to say I used to work in the public sector, and I work in the private sector, and there are some perks that people who work in the public sector get that people in the private sector don't get. I would just like to ask, because I am very worried about the NHS, and I would just like to ask the doctor, where exactly does the extra billions that the government is spending and has spent since Brexit, where is that money actually going?
I'm no health economist. I don't know.
Because we are spending a lot more on health. I mean, everybody
have you got more? No. Has your practice been given more budget?
We're scraping by. The big profits that partners were gathering, I think, in years gone past, I don't see that. I see partners pulling back and struggling to provide the services that we used to be able to give. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer in terms of where all that money's going. All I know is that I see patients coming in on a daily basis, and I'm having to tell them that I can't help them. And 10 years ago we were. And there's a moral injury to us constantly having this.
So do you think then that the NHS needs to be restructured, or what would be your opinion about it? Because if we are spending a lot more money and we're not getting the same services from 10 years ago, there's got to be a problem at the heart of the NHS, has there?
Yeah, people talk about spreading that cake over 7 days, so 7-day working.
Well, the cake has got bigger. I mean, massively bigger, because we are spending a lot more money.
Less full-time GPs than there were this time last year.
I'm talking about the budget, though. The budget for the NHS has increased year on year. That's nobody, not even the Labour.
Is it your suspicion that the money's being wasted somehow?
I don't know. I have no idea. I have no knowledge about it. That's why I thought it would be nice to hear from somebody on the front line, because they know what's happening in the NHS. So
I think part of the problem is we've got a lot more older people. We're an ageing society, and as you have more and more older people, but if you don't keep up with the investment needed to treat that many people in real terms, the investment per individual is going down. So today we have 7 million people on the NHS waiting lists.
What would be the figure for the NHS for us to get to that point where we could treat all the...
Well, I mean, some of it, I mentioned growth earlier on. If you grow the economy and it grew 50% more every year under the last Labour government than under this Conservative government, that generates more money. But it's also about choices in the autumn statement that we just had. For instance, they could have imposed a real windfall tax on the energy giants that are generating billions of surplus profits from war. These are profits from war. They didn't expect to be making this additional money, but there is not a proper windfall tax put on them. So I'll just give you one little example if I can, Krishnan. So, do you know how much money they've got out of Shell from the windfall tax that they eventually imposed? Zero, because they have a loophole that gives all of the money back for investment that they'd already intended to be making anyway. So nothing is coming from the energy giants from those profits. All of it is being made to come from working people through tax increases. That is the wrong choice, it is unfair, and it's hurting families.
Let me bring in Darrell Henson, who's a school teacher, also in the public sector, sitting next to Mike there. What do you think of this conversation around public sector workers?
Yeah, I mean, I see it every day in school. Teachers are buying their own supplies to fund basic education in classrooms. the budget yesterday said £2.3 billion was coming into education, but that is the same number that we had 13 years ago. So we don't really have an increase in funding for the rising cost of living, the energy crisis that we've got, the pay rise that unions are looking to ballot for. That money that's coming into education is going to go straight back out again to pay for basic necessities, really.
And how do you feel about pay? It's interesting that you're all talking about the service rather than your own salaries, which is very laudable. How do you feel about your own salaries?
I mean, obviously, you know, we're feeling pinches everywhere, and everyone's budgeting for their own homes and their mortgages and everything.
In a second, Judge, let me just bring in this gentleman here.
I represent social care providers in Yorkshire. I'm very interested in the public sector pay issue, and I think public sector workers deserve more. But the strange thing in our sector is that many of the staff are paid less, and we employ social care nurses, for example. When the NHS nurses get their rise, then we might lose some staff from us into the NHS. We are there to help the NHS, but social care is another debate, is suffering greatly, and we need the Chancellor to make good his pledges.
Are you trying to come in as well? In the green sweater, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Bryony Holroyd. I'm a Green Party councillor in Darlington, and I sit on the Adult Scrutiny Committee, which scrutinises the adult social care. And all of the changes that the government is planning to, or was planning to bring in, I don't know if they're going to change that now, this fair cost of care, which is great, but they're not giving the council any extra money in the long term. They're giving a sticking plaster to go through that process, but not to fund the council in the long term for the extra cost that will be added. And it should be added because we're paying the social care staff basically the minimum wage, and you can hardly be surprised that they're leaving and that. And it's a well-qualified job, and you can't attract people to a job that's hard.
Councillor, do you want to come back on this? I mean, no, but look at it. but it's...
We have this discussion's happening a lot at the moment, and obviously the leader of the council was on the video before, and he said we're looking at some significant pressures. The problem we have is that as a council budget, 20% of our residents benefit from that 80%, which is the social care money, basically the biggest part of our budget. But to make cuts, because it's statutory, you'd have to potentially reduce the budget in the place that the 20% get benefit from. So it needs to change. Council needs to be better funded by the government. That's a fact.
Thank you, Krishna. If we could just sum up, post-industrial societies are ageing. Post-industrial societies to succeed need higher levels of educational attainment and also support for vocational education. That means more resources per person in those economies. When we look at how the UK spends its money compared to comparable economies, we tend to be at the bottom of the ladder of those expenditures. So how are we going to allocate more resources to those areas that we think are so important for our growth and well-being in our economy? I'm afraid it's going to be higher taxes. The tax receipts at the moment under the plans issued by the Chancellor yesterday, they're going to go to something like 37% of GDP. If we're going to have to get things better in the way it seems like we all want, that's going to have to go to something like 40% of GDP. And I'm afraid that's the only way you're going to square this circle.
OK, let me just bring in briefly Henry Morrison, who's had his hand up from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership.
And I thought the conversation that we started about quality of services was really interesting, because obviously not every part of the education and skills system got money yesterday. The college system, one of the principals from down the road in Hartlepool reminded me before this event, when I said I was coming here, didn't get any extra money. And they are essential for getting people into jobs and into employment and for keeping the economy moving. So I think in responding to that comment, as well as the cost pressure of staff costs, we've got the reality that in this part of the country, people do worse in their GCSEs and their A-levels. Often it's harder to get them into those vocational courses. They haven't got the qualifications to get them on the road. And then the institutions that are supposed to help get those people into employment are going to be seeing a big cut next year. So I think there is a real issue, Krishnan, that if you want to get the economy moving, there are lots of areas, not just big infrastructure that we'll talk about later, like education and skills, that are vital for raising productivity. And as has been observed, if we don't invest in them, we're not going to get the levels of growth we need to pay for other public services like the adult social care crisis.
OK, thank you. So is this budget pain postponed, with many of the tax hikes and spending cuts delayed until after the next election? Is it the next generation of voters picking up the tab? Let's hear from some of the younger members of our audience, and we've got activists from both sides. Heather Lewis, where are you? Let's hear from you. I mean, What we're being told today is that we are now looking at a sustained period of high tax.
Yes.
Your generation's never going to enjoy what mine did.
No.
How does that feel?
It's devastating, to be honest with you. So, even though you are saying that you're putting so much into building up the economy, the people that are about to take your jobs over in a couple of years are struggling to even get through university. I'm at university just now doing my masters, and I know a lot of people that are either dropping out or really, really struggling to afford their bills. I know I am. I can't put my heating on yet. I'm going down to Aldi, Lidl, and I still can't afford some things that I really wish I could.
Can I just ask you, are you politically affiliated as a student?
No.
No. OK, well, someone who is, Ethan Pugh, is from the Young Conservatives on the other side. What's your answer?
I would suggest there is a crunch at the moment. People are struggling with their bills, and there is a massive package of government support coming in to help that. What you may notice is that the government has managed to not take away from people on lower incomes, people on benefits, people who are claiming several other forms of welfare. I don't know what I'm thinking of. And they're giving and giving and giving so people can afford. And I do appreciate that there's been no giving to student unions, student bodies, and I know that the other side of the House have often suggested that university should be free. But when you gain a higher level of education, I believe you're able to then gain a higher level of employment, which will then pay off to give you a higher level of work.
Getting through the education is the difficult part. Like, yes, we can go for the warm heating thing that's £150, and yes, I've applied for that. I can't get it till January or February time. So I need to try and figure out how to afford my bills until then. And that's only going to cover at least part of one of them. That's not going to cover all of them. I know we get the £66 a month off as well. That's not covering all my bills. I can work all the hours under the sun. I've got 3 different jobs and I still can't make it through the month without, I know I'm struggling. And that's
William Wynne Bonham, where are you? From the Young Conservatives. Ah, right, we've heard from you already. I mean, what's your answer here? I mean, and how do you feel about... You're chairman of the Young Conservatives, aren't you?
Yeah.
How do you feel about defending a government or going into the next election when they're saying we don't like to pass debts on to the next generation? When the truth is, debt's going to be at $2.9 billion. You know, it's almost 3 trillion, whatever that number means, in 5 years' time. That's your generation who are going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, so they've been saying for years, oh, we can't pass it on to the next generation, we can't pass it on to the next generation. And I feel like this is the first budget where they've actually put a plan in place for the debt to stop going up as much as it has. Like, for example, they put billions and billions over COVID. They're saying, well, people are struggling now. We're going to help people as much as we can, but we've got to do it fairly, and we've got to do it in the right way.
Yes, you're trying to come in there, gentleman in the middle there with his hand up.
I think that what we've been talking about the budget being sort of terrifying for people of my generation, I'm actually quite sort of, I've got hope now, because I'm seeing that the government is being sort of frank and honest with some of the enormous challenges that we're facing. We're seeing sort of an acknowledgement that more people in the sort of middle bracket are going to be having to pay more tax. We're seeing that those tax bans are being put in place and remaining in place.
OK, so you're feeling more hopeful?
Yeah.
OK, I mean, Simon, you're trying to get in.
I mean, can we be honest when we start discussing things like the debt? Because you say the mad number, like nearly 3 trillion. When Labour were last in power, yes, a lot of borrowing was done to stop the economy from crashing from another global event, which was the financial market crash. However, since then, the debt's, what, tripled?
Yeah, we've had COVID as well.
Yeah, no, but pre-COVID...
Hang on, don't shout out. Let the microphone come to you.
Yeah.
Who are you?
I'm Graham Robb. I run a business in the town, and I've been involved in the development corporation at Steelworks as well. Look, Rishi Sunak has displayed some integrity here. He's one of the politicians this year who's told us at the time that the help for the energy bills, and at the time that the help during the pandemic came, that it would actually have to be paid for. We've had a lot of subsidies, and now we're counting the cost. Now, I run a business. I pay top-rate tax. I have dividend income, and the tax has hit me, but I'll gladly do it because it's necessary to get the inflation welfare and pensions that we need to cushion us at this time. A lot of public services have had the extra that we need. And by the way, you've talked about the public pay for a lot of people. A lot of public sector workers have pay review bodies. People in the private sector will only get pay rises if the profits and the activity are there. The public sector have the chance for a pay review body to get it assessed properly.
Right. Let's just ask Jan Shaw from the National Pensioners Convention a little bit about this question about generational fairness. So pensions, the triple lock has been maintained. Pensions go up by the inflation figure from a couple of months ago. How do you feel about the young generation facing the debts of our generation?
I have children myself, so obviously it's a fearful thing. But in essence, what the National Pensioners Convention does is fight for the pensions of the future, as well as people like myself. And I think when you look at the triple lock and how it maintains, or should maintain, levels of dignity and respect for older people, it hasn't actually done its job. You can accumulate losses as much as you can accumulate gains. So this year we're onto a losing streak. That money will never be recuperated. Yeah? And young people sitting in the room today will not get the true value of what their state pensions should be had we not had that loss. Right?
OK, thank you very much indeed. A recent survey showed a fifth of companies expect the cost of living crisis will be worse for them than the pandemic. Energy costs, inflation, supply chain and staffing issues. Let's hear what's affecting business people here and how they feel. John Elliott, you're the founder of a business making washing machines, is that right? Right, so are you feeling that stress?
Business is not going quite well. I think the budget didn't go far enough. We've all got to realise, I think people do realise, we've got to make sacrifices. We've all got to contribute. Even us old-age pensioners, we've all got to make some contribution. If you're in life...
Didn't go far enough. What, so taxes should have gone up more?
Well, we've got to be tougher. We've got to face reality, because it's not going to go away. Our economic policies has been wrong for 30 years. We don't make enough. We spend more than we consume. Or we consume more than we produce, rather. We rely on imports. You know, we've just got to address that. And I like these words of saying, we look at the investment rather than spending money. There's a big difference. For example, in Darlington here, we're going to spend £120 million on a station that I think is perfectly OK. Invest that in manufacturing and we'll save imports.
Steve Reid, do you want to come in?
No, it's absolutely right. I mean, you have to invest to grow the economy. We're not going to get those good new jobs unless we make real devolution, giving areas more control over their own economies. But we have to stop taxing working people so that they can't afford to live.
Well, we've all got to pay taxes, I'm afraid. We've all got to take some of the load, all of us.
I agree with you, but there were for instance, do people know that hidden away in the detail of the autumn statement yesterday was a tax cut for the banks? So bank surcharge was cut from 8% to 3%. That is worth an awful lot of money. The banks weren't necessarily expecting that. Given the constraints on the economy today, you would think the banks, with all their profits, were not the priority for tax cuts, but that's what the Chancellor chose to do, while putting up taxes on working people.
Let me bring in Reshma Begum from the Federation of Small Businesses. How many of your members agree with John that the budget should have actually gone further?
I can't say that that would be a popular opinion amongst my members, if I'm honest, because a lot of the small business community are facing some significant difficulties, and you know, the costs are only going up. There was a number of different things, and you know, as Steve's just said, there was the taxation around banking. There's also more hidden detail. So, for example, the fuel duty that's due to go up by 12p a litre in March. You know, we're living in a relatively rural area of the country. A lot of people rely on private vehicles, whether we want to admit it or we don't. That's not just people who rely on vehicles for, you know, the day-to-day running of their business. That's people who rely on it as well to access talent, and for those people to access opportunities.
Let me bring in Steve Chestnut. You're in the catering industry, aren't you?
That's right, yeah, with a local event catering company. I was hoping to ask the politicians that didn't make it here this evening, with all of the squeezes that are obvious to all of us that are coming in, what they may have been able to give us some sort of hope as to ideas of possibly looking towards thriving in some areas, rather than what for many is looking like it's going to be striving.
You're feeling hopeless, are you?
It's difficult. You know, a lot of people. I wouldn't say what I'm particularly supplying is a luxury product, but it's a treat for people to come out and enjoy something that we're offering, and we're finding that
treats are the first thing that goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Henry Morrison,
sure.
Northern Powerhouse, is supposed to be tackling all of these fundamental issues in places like the North East. I mean, do you have any hope?
I think we need to have hope for the long term. I think the challenge is, can you still protect those things that really matter, even when you face those current choices that we're facing at the moment? So it would be wrong, for example, to have cut big projects like HS2. I would disagree with the business person about Darlington Station. Obviously, it's a microcosm of the wider issue that we have really poor connectivity in the north of England. You can still have an industrial strategy and invest in big infrastructure. In fact, a few Prime Ministers ago, Theresa May was committed to big infrastructure and an industrial strategy.
What do you think of that
it's
poll
quite possible.
that we heard from Paul at the beginning, which showed that people are now very sceptical that levelling up means anything?
And I think they're right to be concerned, because obviously you've got to ask, if you can't balance the books, how are you going to borrow to invest, as Steve said earlier? You're going to have to invest in raising productivity if you're going to give people better life chances in the north of England. The reason why people in Darlington and the wider Tees Valley, the wider North East, don't have the same life chances is because they don't work in businesses that are as successful as in other parts of the country. Better connectivity, but also getting the most out of that net zero revolution. These are the things, Krishnan, that are going to make a big difference for the next generation of workers, not just the one we've got now.
Just on the front row here, yes, you had your hand up.
I work for the National Federation of Builders, and we represent construction companies up and down the UK, and we're hearing stories where they're really struggling with challenges to do with labour shortages, higher taxes, higher prices, and a poor planning system. And there's little to no support from the government for those businesses to help planning reform. We need planning reform in order to be able to build the infrastructure that we need to support the public services. You can't have a good NHS without hospitals. With a poor planning system, we're not able to get hospitals in the time that we need them to, and it's just we're not having enough support from the government.
Right, behind you, on the back row, there's two of you with your hands up. Just make your points briefly.
Hi, Richard Tucker. I'm a small SME business. We employ 41 people. My concern is the squeeze that now has been put on the small businesses before, because the organic growth will come from small businesses, has always done traditionally.
Yeah.
We pay our taxes in this country. We don't have Cayman Islands.
Do you mean the squeeze in national insurance?
The squeeze in national insurance, but also the ability to invest, to draw down money for investment. We are finding it very difficult, and also to keep the contracts in place for the guys that we employ, because obviously our clients are equally feeling the pinch. And being in a cleaning and property maintenance company, we're one of the ones that get chopped quite quickly.
Okay, and next to you.
Hi, I'm Richard Drake. I own a bookshop in Stockton. Book owners up and down the land are frustrated, and not just book owners, massive with small businesses. Business rates, we were told yesterday, is helping small businesses. Yet today I work out and I'm about to pay £250 a month more from April next year. It's a bonkers scenario. We're trying to create high-value jobs. I can take you within 20 minutes to 3 Amazon fulfillment centres in this area. I think that's 3 too many. I would do. It's certainly 1 too many. It's about starting. The community is amazing. It is desperate to support us.
We want to get ourselves out of this predicament by investing in our people and in our local areas, and by allowing those small businesses to grow. The entrepreneur, that's what we are in this country.
Michelle, you were trying to come in there.
Yeah, I think the third sector they're a business themselves. They're struggling. They've got all the same challenges, and again, the demand on their services are just ridiculous. We're aware of charity workers being paid for 14 hours and volunteering for another 14 hours because of the demand on their services.
Reshma.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the message is largely coming out is that small businesses are a huge contributor, the biggest contributor to our economy. And as we were saying, we want to raise revenue to be able to reinvest and grow our economy. So we do want to see more pro-growth, sort of strategies.
When you see those predictions of 500,000 people unemployed, more, is it coming from your sector?
unfortunately, probably a large proportion of it will be because, you know, small businesses do employ around 16 million people within this country, and they are responsible for the biggest contributions to the economy. So if we keep introducing or we keep disincentivising investment and we keep disincentivising entrepreneurship, then we're going to lose that investment, and we're going to lose those small
Steve Reid, it's all very well to criticise, but have you got a suggestion?
Yeah, well, I'm listening to what these guys are saying. These small businesses are the lifeblood of our high streets, and we need to do something about business rates. It's just crippling. We would abolish that and look for an alternative that levels the playing field between the bricks and mortar businesses on our high streets and the online giants that don't have the costs that you have of having to maintain a presence on the high street. We do not want our high streets to die, but if we continue in this way, that is what will happen, and nobody wants to see that.
Yes, you're trying to come in on the front row.
Chairman of North Darlington Conservatives. I think we need to acknowledge that the government are doing things to help small businesses. Specifically, you know, recently they've just put 14 billion in to help with business rates.
Well, they've said for 10 years that they would sort this problem out. They've done nothing still.
But yes, we have to acknowledge we've been in a state of crisis within.
For 10 years, yes. That's
but look, recently there's been a global pandemic. Sorry, there's a war in Europe. We need to acknowledge that the government is in a state where we need to put these policies in place.
We've had low growth for 12 years now. We've had the worst decade for wage growth since the Great Depression of the 1930s. At some point, the Conservatives need to take responsibility for their inability to grow the economy and the effect that has had on a low-wage, high-tax economy that can no longer fund the public services we all rely on.
Just talking everything down, we're in Teesside and Darlington, where levelling up is in action. In our town, the government, under Rishi Sunak, who is the Chancellor, has put this big economic campus in Darlington. Civil servants are coming up. Asset prices for people who own businesses are going up, which helps them borrow to invest. Down the road at Redcar, there's a free port. On that free port, currently being constructed, is the largest factory under construction in Britain, 1 million square feet, the largest South Korean investment in this country for decades, which is all part of our offshore wind factory. We've got to look, there is some positive stuff here.
We're in the last few seconds. Judge, I mean, there is hope in the room, isn't there? Is there more than you thought?
And hope can be helped if the government encourages business investment and public investment. One of the things we've seen in the autumn statement yesterday is that the amount of public investment is fixed in nominal terms, which means because of inflation it's going to erode over the 5-year period. We need public investment to be around 3% of output. We need to encourage R&D, and all of that would ultimately provide more stability and create the business investment that people are talking about. That has just been too volatile in the sense in which we haven't had a commitment over long enough that local businesses around here can believe in. And I think that's what we really want from this government or whoever may make the next one up. And that's the kind of thing they need, a commitment that they follow through on year after year, Parliament after Parliament. It just hasn't happened for too long.
Thank you all very much indeed. Our time is up, but thank you so much indeed.